Dr. Yalda Hamidi is Assistant Professor of Gender and Women's Studies at Minnesota State University, Mankato. She identifies as a feminist pedagogue, mentor, and storyteller. Dr. Hamidi's research provides a more comprehensive picture of transnational feminism for diasporic communities and explores intersectional identities and feminisms in Iranian women's writing in the diaspora and inside Iran. Dr. Minoo Moallem is a professor of gender and women's studies and the director of media studies at the University of California in Berkeley. Professor Moallem received her MA and BA from the University of Tehran and her PhD from University of Montreal. She's the author of Persian Carpets, The Nation as a Transnational Commodity, Between Warrior Brother and Veiled Sister, Islamic Fundamentalism and the Cultural Politics of Patriarchy in Iran, and the co-editor with Karen Kaplan and Norma Alarcon of Between Woman and Nation, Nationalisms, Transnational Feminisms, and the State, as well as authoring many journal articles. Dr. Fatemeh Sadeghi is a political scientist specialized in political thought and gender studies. She previously researched gender ethics in Islamic Sharia and Zoroastrianism, gender in nationalism and Islamism, Islamist politics, and Iranian Revolution. She also studied the unveiling campaign of the first Pahlavi Iran and the compulsory hijab of the Islamic Republic. In recent years, she worked on the constitutional thought in post-revolutionary Iran. Dr. Sadeghi is a current research associate as Takhayyul, a project at the UCL University of College London's Institute for Global Prosperity. Her research focuses on redemptive aspirations inspired by political and intellectual traditions to make envisioning a different future possible. Focusing on Iran, she studies underlying cognitive historical procedures enabling the individuals and groups to define their identities in a creative cognitive process typically concerned with what is unreal, unknowable, hypothetical, or yet to be. Thank you again for joining us today. I'm going to ask the first question from all of you, and please feel free to have a conversation or respond one at a time. The question I want to ask is that some people have called what is happening in Iran today a feminist revolution. What do you think about this term to characterize the protests in Iran? Is this a feminist uprising, or is it about religion? Is it about the oppression of ethnic minorities? Is it about economy? Why do we see such massive protests in different cities in Iran? And again, is this in fact a feminist revolution? So whoever wants to take the first question, please go ahead. I'm going to ask, maybe Yalda, you can start us on that?
I was going to ask Minoo Jan to go first. But yeah, okay. So hello, everyone. Thank you for giving us your time. And thank you, Sima Jan, for having us here. It's a pleasure to have this moment in solidarity of people who care about Iranian community and the situation that we're dealing with right now in our communities. So many of us feel traumatized. I'm aware of that. And I do hope that this panel gives all of us the feeling of community that we're thinking about. Do we feel like this moment is a feminist revolution? So let me break this question into two parts. Do I feel like this moment has a feminist element? I think I do. And I think so many of the people who participated in the movement, either on social media or in the streets of Iran, or joined us in solidarity in many different cities and spaces, would share this hypothesis with me. And what does make this movement feminist? I think we need to be clear on what we mean feminist. So if we define feminism as a way of thinking about the world that pays attention to intersectional identities, focuses on the idea of race and ethnicity and religion, and of course, gender and sexuality. I would say that yes, this is a feminist moment. And I believe there are many different elements of anti-racist feminism in the movement and how it appeared on the slogans of the people, how they advocate for what happens to different groups of people as it relates to dealing with morality police, hijab police, but also other problems in Iran. So yes, this is a feminist moment. But in response to the second part of the question, do I believe that it's a revolution? I have to say that it depends on how we define revolution. If we are looking at the classic definitions of revolutions, I don't think so. I mean, the political aspect of revolution. And I do believe that Fatemeh Jan would give us much more explanation than what I'm able to provide here. But if we are thinking of a social revolution, meaning that deep and profound changes and challenges to how a society sees itself and how it regards different norms and values and institutions to be in place, I would again agree that this is a revolution. So my short answer to whether or not I see this one as a feminist revolution is yes, uh, but just keep these differentiations in mind of what I mean by a feminist revolution.
Thank you so much, Yalda Jan. Minoo and Fatemeh, any thoughts on that? Minoo Jan, your mic is off.
Okay, I think this is an interesting question, and I agree with Yalda on many points she raised. I have to put this question in the context of the Iranian Revolution of 1979. The Iranian Revolution of 1979 had three major components, Azadi, Istiqlal, and Jamhuri. And then the Azadi was deferred and is still being deferred, right, in terms of both freedom of speech, the imposing of Islamic veiling, and so on and so forth. The Istiqlal aspect was gained. As we know right now, Iran is relatively an independent country in terms of, being positioned in geopolitical and global context. And then the question of republic was a contested question. Some people who participated in the revolution wanted a democratic republic, and then finally we ended up with the hegemony of an Islamic republic, which was an experiment by itself, right? Because it took form gradually in the last 40 years. However, unfortunately, in the last 40 years, what remains consistently there is the linkage of veiling and Islamic nationalism, even though that Islamic nationalism is no more a social movement which was during the time of the Iranian Revolution, and it is now a state ideology, a state that is ruling like any other nation state in the name of the nation, and a state that needs to respond to the nation. And we all know that this is a discussion that I might focus on later on, and we all know that all nation states focus and invest in a notion of we-ness that is exclusive of otherness, that is exclusive of difference. And even though there are many women in Iran that still veil and might use veiling as a form of movement in this space. There are women who are contesting imposed veiling, and that they are also citizens of Iran, and they're contesting, and they're protesting, and they're asking the state why they're not being included and not invested, and the state does not invest, is not investing in their life. So in that sense, I would say that the lingering of Azadi from the time of the Iranian Revolution of 1979 continues to create crisis for the Islamic Republic, because that was not achieved. And the reasons for which it did not achieve is that, first of all, the coup d'etat of Noger, where the US tried to overthrow the Islamic Republic. Then after that, it was the occupation of Iran by Iraqi forces. And at that time, they were close to France and the US, and we invested in that. And again, Azadi was deferred because we were in a war and Iran was occupied. And then after that, gradually the state became more securitized and invested in securitization and surveillance and so on. So we should not forget also that Iran is geopolitically positioned in a very important region of the world, and what is happening in Iran cannot be separated. Now, is this a feminist revolution? I don't know. The world revolution has a lot to do with kind of colonial modernity and the ways in which we envisage social movements leading to the change of the state. One state elite is removed and the other one's not. But if we think of revolution as interrupting patriarchal discourses and misogynist discourses that have to do with the questions of class, ethnicity, and so on, yes, I think this is a moment of interruption. However, this moment historically is relying on earlier moments, and disconnecting these earlier moments is a problem that unfortunately our younger generation, maybe we need to talk more about that, because it is actually immediately after the establishment of the Islamic Republic, we had movements of contestation by women. We have feminists on all sides of discourses, Islamic feminists, secular feminists, that started to really negotiate discriminatory laws. It is relying on fabulous journals, the Journal of Magazines, Zanan magazine, lots of activists who started to negotiate discriminatory gender laws in Iran. And then, of course, it has been continuing. So we are really talking about a movement that has continued to be there for 40 years, and women both in Iran, especially in Iran, have been fighting it. And we are also dealing with a population of women that are, many of them are educated, many of them gained access to citizenship, not like under the Shah's regime as objects of citizenship, but as subjects of citizenship. That was the byproduct of the Iranian Revolution. Women became active citizens of the nation state. And we are also owing to many women, film directors, TV series makers, those who are working broadly in the popular realm to raise issues that are not necessarily, raised by formal discourses, but by popular discourse, by TV series, by so on. And this is really a continuation of that, but this is also a specific event that is taking place right now. Thank you. I think that's right.
John, for that nuanced response. Fatemeh, any thoughts?
Yeah, thank you so much. Hello, everyone. Am I allowed to share a screen?
I believe, Nithya, can you give access to Dr. Sadeghi to share her screen?
You should be able to now.
Yeah. So can you see it now?
Yes.
Yeah. So let me start, answering your question by showing this picture. And I'm sure that many of you have already seen this, but I like it because there are so many elements in this picture. Unfortunately, the photographer is Dunya Rad, the woman who actually took this picture of herself and probably her friend were arrested today, apparently, because of this picture. But I think that there are so many nice elements in this picture. And by highlighting some of them, I will answer your question. So first of all, this picture was put by Dunya on her Twitter account. And then she explained briefly that in the middle of work, we went to Javadia neighborhood, which is a neighborhood in the south part of Tehran. And we ate breakfast like this, and then we went back. So from outside, maybe that seems like a very normal picture that you can see in every part of the world, including in the Middle East. But considering the context of Iran, it is actually, I think that it is quite significant. It is a very historic picture. And I'm gonna, explain some of the, just about the context of this picture and why I think that is important and why it actually answers your questions. First of all, they are without veil. So this is quite significant because, for those of you who have been in Tehran or raised in Tehran, you know that, in coffee houses, this is actually the pictures has been taken in a coffee house or qahwekhane. In coffee houses, you cannot be, as a woman, sometimes you cannot attend this place. At least you are accompanied by a man. But these two women are there. They not only are eating breakfast, but without veil. So this is a very rare incident. This is not ordinary. And another interesting thing is that the male customers here, two gentlemen here on the left side and on the right side, one of them is on his phone as if nothing happens, because you cannot see this picture in Tehran normally, but he's on his phone, and another customer actually drinking his tea. But this is quite amazing because it seems that something has changed suddenly. This picture gives us a sense of change, and it also associated with eating breakfast as if a new era, a new history has begun. And they are eating breakfast in the middle of work and without veil in a coffee house in the south part of Tehran. And I'm gonna, just ask you to pay attention that this neighborhood in the south part of Tehran is Javadia neighborhood, is mostly a working class neighborhood. And the atmosphere of the neighborhood and also the atmosphere of this coffee house is mainly, not all the time, of course, but mainly is male-dominated atmosphere. So, but these two gentlemen, they are actually, they are doing their own work. There is no sarcastic remark. There is no even staring at these women, as if nothing happened. And it gives us a sense of normalcy that has been absent from the ordinary life in Iran, actually. But another significant element in this picture is in the mirror. There is a picture of another gentleman who might be the customer or who might be the owner of this coffee house. But it's, we see him from his back. So it again adds to this element that it's very ordinary. It's very sudden. It's very historical, but it's ordinary. These are the mixed element in this picture. And I think that your question is here. I mean, the answer of your question is here, that yes, definitely this is a women's movement, but it's not just a women's movement. I think it's a social revolution, as Yalda John said. And I think that here you see this revolution. This is not just women who are doing it, although women are at the front of this movement, but this is not just women that are doing it. And I think that there is a history to that picture that maybe later I will go back to that. But I think that everyone who experienced humiliation in Iran, regardless of your gender, regardless of your class, regardless of your ethnicity, religion, race, whether you live in city or whether you are settling in provincial areas, everybody actually experienced this humiliation. And suddenly there is this solidarity that actually that linked people together. And because of that, this miracle, you see that nobody in this picture pays any attention to this woman, as if it's completely normal, which is not true. So I think that yes, but this is a movement that is led by women, but this is not just women. There are so many working class people. There are so many, upper middle class, working class women, so many Kurds, and we are hearing now the Baluchs and Arabs, and so many religious ethnicities like Sunni, Shia, and all sorts of people actually joined this movement because in some ways or the other, they feel this humiliation, that in this system, they have been humiliated and for long. So I think that the whole thing is actually centered in this very nice slogan, women, life, and freedom. So these are the elements that have been absent from the post-revolutionary Iran, at least, if not before, but I think that even before, we can talk about it, and later on, maybe if there is a chance, I will get back to it. So they demand for dignity. Women have always, there were always states or communities or families or other people who have decided for women. This is now women that they decide for themselves, and that's the picture that tells us, and also people on the street. So I think that as Professor Minoo and Yalda John told us, freedom is something that is a significant element in this movement. Something that, for instance, at some point in the Iranian Revolution, in the Arab Spring, or other occasions, people chanted for. But this is a key element of this movement. And I think that it's pro-life. It's, I admire Iranian Revolution from many respects, but I have to say that the Iranian Revolution, it was a death and the sacredness of blood and, sacrifice yourself for the cause of the nation was quite admired. So at that time, it was that, that sort of idea that captured people's thought. But now we see that, this generation, although so many of them were arrested, so many of them were killed on the streets, but they are chanting life. And this is something that I really admire in this movement. Thank you.
Thank you, Fatemeh John. All of you pointed to the aspect of freedom and also how revolution in the context of this protest is a process, that revolutions don't happen overnight. And from what I heard in what the three of you said, the Iranian women have been participating in the political processes and have been on the streets and objecting or having all kinds of protests over the years, in the 40-something years after the Iranian Revolution, to state violence and to compulsory hijab, and also to economic disenfranchisement of many women. So what I want us to talk about, since all of you kind of talked about the notion of freedom, is the slogan that is, in my mind, as Dr. Sadeghi said, different than some of the slogans in the past, and that is woman, life, freedom, which is the slogan that a lot of women inside Iran and outside who are in support are chanting, and is also the title of this panel. I want to ask you, all three of you, to elaborate on what is different about this slogan. Is it different than what came before it? And does the slogan, when we talk about freedom, does it reproduce the problematic notions of individual freedom associated with liberal democracy and colonial modernity, or does it have potential for a different kind of future? As Fatemeh said, this is about life. So what kind of world making, what kind of life does this slogan contain itself, or what are the potentials of this slogan? Whoever wants to take that question on, go ahead, please.
Should I take on the question? Yeah, okay. So I think of course, this slogan has lots of potential. This slogan was suggested by Abdullah Öcalan to PKK and for PKK militants to put priority on fighting patriarchy along with other fights. So, and then the concept of life, living, is in proximity also with Black Lives movements in the US, where the politics of life, according to Black Lives Movement, is any kind of Black body we should invest in that. It's not just, some. We have to invest in all bodies, and that is about the politics of life, right? And we know that the nation states are the only institutions in modern nation states have the right to kill and to let people live, like something that Michel Foucault mentioned so many years ago, faire vivre, laisser mourir, right? And they have that right. And many nation states could be like, the US, that is de-investing in the life of African Americans and immigrants and undocumented. There could be the Iranian state that is not investing in the life of those who are against compulsory hijab. So in that sense, it has the potential of talking to the politics of life. Also, the politics of life are about also the right to enjoy life, the right to pleasure. So all those things that are related. So then it brings me back to some tensions and hard questions that we need to ask. I think the translation of Azadi is not necessarily freedom or freedom from or freedom to, that I have written about that many years ago, that created this dichotomy among white feminists and fundamentalist feminists, those who are saying we need freedom from, and those who are saying we need freedom to. So that is dichotomizing a lot, and that form of dichotomization creating lots of spaces of silence. So, but Azadi, maybe it's a little different from freedom. It's Azadi, it's nothing attached to Azadi, not from, not to. So it's an abstract, it's an ambiguous concept. I wouldn't say it's a very clear-cut concept. It's a concept that has the potential of futurity, meaning that potential for creating discussions and debates among those of us who care about gender issues, women's issues, sexuality issues, and so on, all over the world, no matter it's in Iran or in the US or in other parts of the world. So in that sense, the potentiality is the presence of a space that is opened up for discussion, discussions that you are talking about. Are we talking about liberal individualism? If we are talking about liberal individualism, what happens to Islamist women? Does this feminist revolution include Islamist women, or are we investing in secular fundamentalism to create this dichotomized and bipolar space that people are silenced, and that space is unacceptable as much as the state censorship is unacceptable? I think that space creates epistemological blindness. It creates epistemological deafness that we are not willing to cut. And actually, I think if we think about a feminist revolution, I would ask many questions. I would say, which kind of feminism? Because as a scholar of gender and women's studies, since I started to do research, I always ask the question, whose feminism? Which feminism? Are we referring to a feminism, as Yalda mentioned, that is not thinking about class, not thinking about race, not thinking about imperialism? Are we investing in another kind of mainstream white feminism that has been oppressing women, that are being oppressive in a sense? Are we reinvesting in an imperialist feminism that wants to rescue Muslim women, or that wants to rescue Iranian women? And right now, Iranian diasporic women who are heavily identifying with that discourse, that are not trying to represent Iran. So it's just really the events that are happening in Iran are being represented in multiple ways. And we have to be careful about that, and we have to interrogate that, and we have to question that. Not every image is innocent, not every image is conveying what we want to it convey. We are doing tons of critical work to be able to read images carefully and critically and so on. So in that sense, I would say, yes, the slogan has lots of potential. Also, the concept of Zan, I think, is potentially there, but it's an ambiguous concept as well, because that is a concept that was born out of Iranian modernity and modernity in general, colonial modernity, and the dichotomy of Zan, Mad, all these things have a history, and we can't take it like just as taken for granted. I think it has potential for futurity, for thinking about what do we mean by a feminist revolution? Do we mean another kind of a secular fundamentalism? Do we mean a kind of Islamic fundamentalism? Do we mean a white feminism that are now going to be? No, I think we need to think very hard about what we mean by that. As many women, many feminists in other parts of in the global south are carefully thinking about this sentence. Does it include anti-colonialism? Does it include decolonial approaches to understanding gender issues? So these are really great questions. And if this moment, we could take this tragic moment, right? If this moment is based on a tragedy, and that tragedy is really unacceptable, right? The morality police brutalizing, killing a young woman and so on. It's a moment. However, this moment could open up a space for more discussion, for thinking through what we mean by this, for really understanding it better, to think about the future, right? Because the future and the past and the present are related to each other. That's all I wanted to say.
Thank you, Minoo Jan. And I'm hoping that we'll have some more conversation about some of the concepts that you brought up. Yalda Jan, do you want to take on this question next?
Yeah, sure. I'm a child of revolution. I was born and raised and made in Iran, true and true. And it's only maybe 12 years of the last 12 years of my life that I'm here. So I just want to put a scenario in front of you. I imagine myself going to one of those 22 Bahman demonstrations and just shouting, women life freedom. And I imagine the president of the state, be it Raisi or any other person, said, yeah, absolutely, women life freedom. We have all three of them in the Islamic Republic that's supported by our ideology. These are not the words that we haven't heard over the past 43 years. They are actually some of the canonical words that the ideology of the state built itself upon them. So what is it that right now we have a revolutionary slogan of the used and overused and abused words, women, life, freedom. And I think the potential, the revolutionary element of any of these words is the power of reclaiming. So I just want to build upon what Minoo mentioned. I think this revolution, it's the revolution of imagination. And you can see that in a picture that Fatemeh showed all of us. Having Nimru for your breakfast.
It was
It was what?
Kelle poche.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I no offense for kelle poche lovers. I know the importance of that food in Iranian culture. So eating kelle poche and pretending that the revolution has begun and the new era has come. So this is the potential of imagining something else that disrupts the order. So let me tell you, as a person who grew up there, if you would say women life freedom, somebody representative of a state, I imagine, would say, absolutely, we respect women. This revolution is built on women thriving in the Islamic Republic. And also, let me tell you, part of that narrative is true. There are some levels of truth in that. So the data and the statistic and scholarly work shows that some groups of women have thrived over the past 4 decades. So women from lower classes found the opportunity to go to schools and universities. Some women had the opportunity to find jobs and become breadwinners. And everybody knows of Iranian filmmakers and academics and scientists and everything. It's not I'm so sorry, a very live moment. My phone is ringing, just ignore it. So yeah, what I want to share with you is that how is it that the imagination of women should be different, and why is it that this moment is very meaningful for somebody like me? So I hear women, and I want to include all the women who did not comply with the ideology of a state. I want to remember and name the women who lost their jobs and educational opportunities and left Iran. Part of my work is Iranian diaspora. And many years ago, I made this argument that the Iranian diaspora is a feminist diaspora, because so many of us have left Iran because we couldn't be kind of women that we wanted to be in Iran. I lost my academic jobs, and I'm only one of many, many women who lost many opportunities and had to leave. I was not imagined in Iran as right, as fit, as appropriate. And there were very limited room. One of my wonderful, wonderful friends that I see joining this meeting, she's a respectable academic. And I'm so sorry to hear that she was harassed by some of the colleagues because of one simple post that she put on Twitter. A woman who goes on Twitter and makes the smallest comment is now respected and is not tolerated. So we want to imagine women broadly and differently, because the imagination should incorporate all of us. Just because Minoo said we are all citizens, and even though we don't comply with the ideology of the human making that you design in this revolution, it doesn't mean that you can. I have to get this one and tell them that I'm on. Just forgive me for a minute. I'm so sorry.
You, but we have
I know it's not, but just leave it behind the door. I appreciate it.
There's any other stuff you want me to check?
Yes, but you cannot do that right now. You should have caught. I'm sorry. So I'm so sorry. They were supposed to call me. So yeah, but I want to tell you is that what I'm worried about the word women. I'm one of the avid readers of Iranian queer diaspora. And right now I'm hearing people talking about what about women? What about us? And Sima, in one of the work that I'm really a big fan of, mentioned that how the imagination of Iran has become this heteronormative homeland. So in this imagination and through this slogan, I would like to, for all of us, to rethink the connotations of womanhood. Who is a woman and who is not? Who should have been able to be in that picture? I would very much love to imagine a day that the same picture in that qahwakhane is taken from queer community, having their breakfast and not getting noticed. Just like citizens, just like any other citizens. So I am very hopeful for this slogan, but also I want to take a moment and I want to acknowledge my privilege and I want to ask the other question. Where do we go with this revolution if it's going to happen? Am I going as a cis woman to ask queer community to wait another 40 years? And I'm going to keep you out of this slogan until you can't take it anymore. Or is the queer community and is everything that goes beyond the dichotomy of man versus woman is included in this word woman? And that's why I'm saying that we cannot hold on to the promises of multicultural feminisms anymore. And multicultural feminism is the one that wants to welcome this one. I tell my students that, you know, through multicultural ideologies, multicultural feminism would be only one of those. You want to imagine a world that you can have an ice cream from each culture and feel like you're a culture? No, this is not how it happens. We need something more serious. And in this moment, I would say the word anti-racist and anti-racist feminism is the one that gives us the promise and actually incorporates all of those ideologies. I would like to hear the voices of all ethnicities and all people who were left out of the imagination of the states kind of come true in this slogan. And I think only through that we can have a slogan that's inclusive enough that pushes us through imagination of a revolutionary future or a feminist futurity, as we call it in our terminology. So when I think of future, I do want all the ethnic groups equal and able to enjoy the pleasures and privileges of citizenship. And I do want all women. So I do want women who wear veil to feel safe. I was on another panel yesterday with one of my hijabi sisters from Turkey who organized that panel for me. And I feel what comes out of this revolution is so disheartening for all the believer Muslim women, and I don't want it to be. I do want me to feel comfortable to show up on DuPont Center and wear veil in solidarity with them. And I do want them to wear their veils for their choice and freedom and burn a veil for me, because I'm a woman who lost my citizenship to the land and lost my academic job because I was not going to comply with the land. So I think the extent that we go with this slogan is the band that it gives us with imagination. And the broader and the more inclusive we can imagine future, the more we can hold on to this slogan. And that's also the problem with the other slogan that somebody put out, and I may not give it the space, but I want to mention that. So, you know, that's why we need to explain why Mard, Mihan, Abadi, man, land, and prosperity, if with my broken translation, somebody correct me on this, is not the opposite of women, life, freedom. it's supposed to be something that we all can hold on to. You know, let me give you an example of the history of reproductive justice in the US. That's something that's very true and near to my heart. Reproductive justice, عدالت باروری, is a movement that says if a Black woman is safe in the United States for making a choice on not having a child, or if they decide to have a child, to raise that child with safety, without the fear of police brutality, then the rest of us are going to be free. And I think it's really important that we imagine that if a Kurdish girl, 22-year-old, young, unmarried, not wearing a proper hijab according to what the state expects her to wear, is safe in the streets of Tehran, the rest of us maybe can be free. And in addition to that, I do want that non-binary, queer identifying person to feel safe, to express themselves in any way that they see fit, and feel safe and feel part of a nation as any one of us. And I imagine until that moment, none of us can be free. And I think this is the biggest thing that this slogan offers, the opportunity of imagining otherwise.
Thank you so much, Yalda John. There's so much in what you said that I'm hoping, again, you know, after answering the questions, we can discuss further. And I think one thing that both you and Minoo said, and you know, I haven't forgotten that, Fatemeh, you haven't responded to this, and you wrote a brilliant piece about this slogan and, you know, the imagination. So I want to hear your thoughts and other people who haven't also read your piece. But I think, you know, what the two of you said is really important in terms of the potentiality of this slogan, not just in terms of kind of the essentialist notions of womanhood, but thinking about womanhood or the term woman in ways that considers ways of exclusion, the way that the modern nation state has excluded some from the realms of citizenship. And, you know, the notion of citizenship came up, and I want to also, you know, think beyond queerness as an identity, but also think about those who are queered from the realm of citizenship, including refugees, and that would be Afghan refugee women as well, and Afghan refugee men. And what you said, Yalda, the very, I think, nationalistic slogan that has become also, you know, is accompanying Zan, Zindagi, Azadi, Man, Mihan, Abadi, which really, you know, is kind of a reactionary response that cannot see women as being the ones who are leading this movement. And again, it's kind of resorting to nationalist notions of manhood and also development and, you know, motherland, which are really problematic in thinking about how women have been participating and asking for, you know, the kind of azadi that you all talked about. Fatemeh, I would love to hear your thoughts about the slogan and what kind of potentials it holds.
Thank you so much. While I was listening to Minoo John and Yalda John notions and opinions, I actually, so many things came to my mind, but I just wanted to stick to some of the elements that I consider in regards to the question or issue of potentiality, which is still, I mean, itself is a very you know, nice sort of word that we can talk about especially in this context. Excuse me, but I wanted to actually emphasize 3 main points that I think that you know, I myself see in this movement, and I think that because of that, there is this potentiality. But as the word itself implies, it's only potentiality. So this potentiality can lead to completely other direction. and into something that is not, that now we cannot imagine. But let me tell you that, there is, when you look at, this term Middle East, actually, I have to say that I hate this term, but not only because of the colonial connotations of that, but because look at all those medias and even intellectual stuffs that are written on Middle East, and so many other visual and audio things about the Middle East. All of them, in some ways or the other, imply that Middle East is, struggling with authoritarianism, with misogynism, with violence, and all these things. And and I think that something like this movement that talks about freedom and woman and life is actually disrupting that hegemonic paradigm and that hegemony. So I really like that. So I think that is the potentiality that we can talk about. I'm not saying that now everything is okay, but or will be okay in the future. No, but look at the Arab Spring, look at the Iranian Revolution, look at so many other events that took place in our region. All of them, or even Constitutional Revolution, and so many other places and events. So a term that is used repeatedly about them is failure, which is, not only intellectually, but also psychologically. So as if that we are still experience a collective trauma, a collective depression. And I think that part of this, after the Iranian Revolution, and especially after the Green Movement of 2009 against the fraudulent election, this trauma is something that comes up all the time, and we cannot ignore it. So many of my friends, and I myself, we experienced this collective trauma. And I think that something as this movement when comes up, you suddenly feel something different. You suddenly feel that, oh my God, another future is possible, and the collective trauma is gone. So these days, a word that I'm hearing from so many friends is that there is a hope. And so many of them, and look at the Twitter, you see that there are so many, tweets about the depression, about, pills, antidepressant pills, and so on and so forth. But now people feel that, no, there is hope. And I think that exactly as that trauma was collective, this hope is also collective. So I think that differentiates this from liberal democracy and individual democracy. And although so many people, Iranian people, actually try to confiscate this movement and call themselves as a leader of this movement, which is completely awful, and I think that disgusting. But this is people's movement on the street of Tehran that are killed because of the hope that they are actually claiming, because they look at the future differently. And I think that this is a very important aspect of this movement, that as soon as you are on the streets, another future becomes suddenly possible. And all these questions that the respectable participants ask, what about queer movement right? What about other oppressed, the rights of other oppressed group? What about ethnicity? And suddenly all of these questions actually become meaningful. So I think that this is exactly the opportunity that I'm talking about. And one really interesting element in this movement is that although the revolution in terms of political revolution, is not taking place, and probably at least not in the near future as we know it. But because of that, social potentiality, that collectivity that created by this movement, it's now emerging. The imagination is emerging now, that you can see it in people that try to, from, with different kinds of elements or instruments, by by participating on street protests, or by making songs, or by, making artistic things, and making these conferences, and, gatherings, and, lots of conversations. And I think that this is the potentiality that has been absent. What I'm trying to say is that, yes, there are so many serious questions about this movement, but I think that one thing that actually makes all these questions possible is this emerging hope. And because of this visioning, because of imagining a future different from what we have experienced in the past, in that failure paradigm, I think that these questions are also, these questions become possible. So I think that against the background that we know, like, for instance, the imposition of the hijab by the Reza Shah, or the imposition of unveiling by the Reza Shah, and the imposition of veiling by the Islamic Republic, and look at our neighboring countries. All of them, in one way or the other, they experienced this imposition by Taliban in Saudi Arabia, and now a reverse trend, and also in Turkey and so many other places around us. And this negation of imposition, this unfolding hope that is emerging on the street of Iran, this is something that I call potentiality. But of course, there are so many serious questions, and I think that all of them are valid, no matter what, whether they are about ethnicity, whether about gender, identity, whether about, race, which is a very, it's very important, and it's deeply rooted. Racism is deeply rooted in Iranian culture. But there are so many serious questions. But I think that I myself prefer to stick to this little tiny hope that is emerging, and it's actually very precious for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Fatemeh Jan. Thank you, all three, for this wonderful question. I'm going to ask a question and relate it to, I just looked at Q&A, and I think it might be also useful because so many of you, all three of you, referred to the 1979 revolution, and in thinking about this, whether it's a feminist revolution or not. There are two questions, and I'm going to try to connect them together. One is the one that I wanted to ask you, which is, well, let me reframe it. Someone has asked, why are you calling this a revolution? Before the 1979, it was just normal for women to be without veil, right? So I think it would be important to address, and Fatemeh, I know you have written about this. Minoo, you have written about this when I was an undergrad student. I actually read, your articles and your book, the concept of Badan Madani, civic body, and the way that women's bodies become sites of struggle for whether it is liberation by, the kind of those who call themselves the leaders of the revolution sitting in the US, or, whether it is the Islamic fundamentalism, as Yalda said, that, use the trope of woman and freedom, as Daman zan mard be miraj miravad, or all those notions of deploying the word woman. Can we talk about how women's bodies are, become sites of freedom or lack thereof through woman becoming the signifier? That's basically whether it was during Kashf Hijab, during Reza Shah's time, or whether it is compulsory hijab. So can we focus about this? And it also connects to what was brought up about the slogan and the man mihan, the man motherland development or prosperity, however you want to translate that. I think it's really crucial that we actually address how woman as a signifier has become the site of these contestations and a way that one can think about political subjectivity. So I'll leave that to the three of you to decide who wants to talk about that first. You're silent, Minoo.
Okay, should I talk about that? I think the question of, it bothers me that after so many years of anti-colonial critique, we are still stuck within the trope of veiling, unveiling, deveiling, reveiling. So as you know, Iran is not a homogeneous country. It has different kinds of ethnicities, different cultures, and so on. Also, the Iranian women never used dressing as a homogeneous act, right? They were women in tribal women in rural areas, women in lower classes, in more kind of traditional small towns. They had different kinds of clothing. And what the colonialist gaze did, the colonialist gaze invested in this signifier as of veil as the site of oppression of Muslim women, right? When we started to talk about women's question within the colonial discourse, what was depicted for Muslim women was they're veiled, they're barbaric, they're uncivilized, right? And as I have written about that extensively, and sometimes I feel, have I written 2005, so many years ago? So under Reza Shah, the same heterogeneity existed, and the modern nation state created this abstracted body from the concrete bodies of peasants, working classes, middle classes, so on and so forth, and invested in that, in unveiling to create this civic body that could be liberated, modernized by the male elite. So the male elite kept its patriarchal power and then started to invest in unveiling. And we know that the unveiling was not about freedom, it was about freeing women. It was about bringing women into the realm of consumerism, capitalism, modernization, development, everything else that we know. And it would be long if I were to talk about that. So then during the time of revolution, again, every oppositional group, left and Islamists, they reinvested in the question of clothing, right? Leftist women rejected the consumerist, like figures of modern women, and they were wearing tunics and so on. From those of us who have been in Iran during that time, you know that. Then the Islamists put veiling, some put scarf, and so on and so forth. They distinguish each other from each other to contest and challenge the imposed unveiling of Pahlavi regime and its investment in state feminism, everything else. So of course, Islamic nationalists constructed their nationalism based again this civic body that could be veiled, and by veiling this civic body, then we didn't need to deal with concrete materials, bodies on the ground, bodies that are different, bodies that are constructed, cultured differently, or different relationship. So in that sense, we got stuck into that trope, which is a colonial trope. It doesn't matter if it's used by the modernizing Pahlavi dictatorship or by the Islamic Republic investment in the imposition of veiling. So, but in between this, there is thinking about women's bodies and citizenship, right? What is the right of the state to discipline women? Who has the right to discipline women? We know that all modern nation states try to create docile bodies. They're all invested in femininity, in marginalizing femininity, and especially entangled with race, class, and so on. They're all invested in the idea of a civic body that doesn't relate it to racial community, that are marginalized community, that is not working in the fields, in the villages, that is not working, as taxi drivers in the cities. So all these things. So it is something that continues to vibrate and provoke issues. And I think the French government banning of hijab for Muslim women is as disgusting and as problematic as the suppression of women who are trying to remove their veil and challenge imposed veiling in Tehran. And we know that in Tehran, religious women, many of them are against imposed state veiling. Even those who decided to self-veil, to go against the kind of imperialism and colonialism and consumerism and commodification of women's body, they're against that imposed state veiling. So in that sense, and there has been lots of coalitions in the last 40 years between secular feminists and religious feminists to work out against patriarchal issues. Also, I see that in the question, this dichotomy of, are you for the regime? Are you against the regime? Are you feminist? Are you against? Are you including Muslim feminism as feminism? No. These forms of dichotomies, as I said at the beginning of my talk, are creating silences, are creating censorship, are producing again the same kind of censorship that we are challenging. Secular fundamentalism is no different from religious fundamentalism. They're both investing in the same kind of tropes, and that is problematic. And that is problematic that a trope that was picked, was created, came into the realm of representation through the gaze of the colonial rule. Now it's still vibrating so lively among us and creating. And I should say to Yalda John that I know you didn't mean it, but our diaspora is not feminist necessarily. There are feminist scholars, different waves of feminists who left Iran because of their activism, and we know that, all of us. Yeah. However, we have also among diasporic Iranians, those who are making alliances with right-wing US reactionary forces that I don't want to name, we know all their name, and I'm really kind of very critical of New Yorker as a reputable magazine in the US that is buying into somebody who's standing with Trump and his ilks, right-wing ilks, and their powerful misogyny would advocate Iranian women's movement. Also, I would go against those fragments of diaspora that is telling, bomb Iran, more sanctions for Iran. How come the dying of young Iranian women from lack of cancer medication, masses of Iranians from lack of vaccination? How do we think about their lives? Do we think their lives are not important? Their lives have no value? Yes, it has no value. And I do not identify, I contest those segments of diaspora that is hijacking what is going on the streets of Tehran, that are for the killing of masses of Iranians through US bombing, through more sanctions, through what they say, let's have a civil war in Iran. We don't care. Yes, I do care about any single life of Iranians or non-Iranians, like any single life that has been marginalized. And I think that is really awful that we are not again being put. And as a professor of gender and wisdom, I save that space, I protect that space of questioning, interrogating, thinking hard, and so on and so forth. There is no way of ending it, ending it. Don't close it up. You cannot. We need to open it up. We need to open up discussions rather than closing up. Okay, I talked too much. Sorry, Simanta.
No, thank you, Minoo. You all can probably tell that I was mentored by Minoo for many, many years, and we share those sentiments about the sanctions. Many of you know that with a group of people, we were running the No Sanctions on Iran campaign, and part of our argument was also that those who are advocating for sanctions in the name of women's rights or women's freedom are actually subjecting women to slow death or death through bombs. So I want to give the opportunity to Yalda and Fatemeh to respond to that last question. And before doing that, because we only have 12 minutes left, I wanted to know if all three of you are okay if we extend for 5-10 minutes to get to some of the questions in the Q&A, if that's okay with you. Okay, great, thank you. Yalda Jan and Fatemeh Jan.
Do you mind if I go, Fatemeh Jan? So I want to respond to what Minoo Jan said, and my response is pretty short. I consider white feminism as a version of feminism. It's definitely is very unpleasant, and I'm very much critical of that, but it exists. It's the elephant in the room, and that's why I have sections on my transnational feminism classes, and I teach as white feminism, because I think it's important to consider it as is and talk about that and open a space for criticizing it. But I'm anti-sanction, I'm anti-invasions, I'm anti-war, and I am ready to use my body for as much as it can provide the support for the sovereignty of the land, Iran. Because I do believe in all of those things. I don't think that people sitting here and there claiming to be other people's leaders get the right to claim such positions until the leadership is given to them by the people who are fighting on the ground. So I think we agree on this, but I just wanted to make sure that how I'm using the definition of the term feminism. But let me go back to the question of body and how the body is fetishized. I think it's important. I do want, like Minoo, to take a historical approach in responding to this question, even though my historical answer is a little different. So I do want to mention two solid, coming from two different areas of expertise, research. One of them is an old book, actually, by Kumari Jayawardena, published in early 1980s. And the other is the scholarship of my mentor, Dr. Firuze Kashani Sabet, on reproductive processes in Iran. And what those two research have in common is that Jayawardena would argue that the Iranian feminism, along with so many other feminism, is the child being born out of the idea of Iranian nationalism. So because we had the nationalism, which is something that comes out of the colonial era, of course, we also wanted women to represent the idea of the progress of the nation. And that's actually how the early feminist patriots argued for the necessity of the hygiene for female body in the hospitals and how they give birth and the hygiene of the breastfeeding and so on and so forth. But the idea was like these women need to be healthy to give birth to healthy sons and daughters who are going to be the future of the nation. And even though this is an old ideology, it's been adopted by so many different groups, and it's not just Iran. You can see that in so many different cases in the Middle East. So for example, I'm thinking about Mahsa Amini and how he sees Egyptian women need to be women like Queen Elizabeth and the examples of his time to just represent the modern Egyptian woman who is good for the progress of the Egypt as a nation. nation state. So yes to all of that, but I just also want to give you two more examples of how women's bodies have been appropriated and why it's important to hold on to the idea of woman in Women, Life, Freedom, a slogan. One of the examples I have is actually from the articles of family law under Pahlavis. And I don't remember the number of articles, but you can find them in Parvin Paidar's book, which is a very solid book on Iranian feminism. And she mentions that how even during the Pahlavi, women were not given lots of rights within the family system, because the idea of the Iranian family was a family for the nation, and women were supposed to be just caring and nourishing for the nation. They were supposed to have education and to find jobs that are good enough for the family, but still remain within the territory of the family and not go beyond and not challenge hierarchies, not even the hierarchy of their patriarchs, let alone the patriarch of the nation who would be the Shah at the time. And the issue with the family law is a very serious issue up to this day. And actually considering family law and comparing it with the text of the Quran is one of the main notions of Islamic feminism worldwide, because it's still important. What's interesting for me is how this notion have been adopted by so many different jurists, from traditional jurists to new jurists to even Islamic intellectuals in the tradition of Islamic intellectualism. And it's really interesting to me that it's not my discovery, it's my mentor Ziba Mir Hosseini's work, that how all of these men somehow find some agreement on how women need to comply and need to be the second type citizen in all of these different discourses that are vastly different and have so many disagreements, but they agree on just submitting women's body to certain rules when they come to decide about that. But the other part of the story that's really also interesting to me is that, as Minoo said, it wasn't very different during Pahlavis. Veiling and unveiling the same time, Pahlavis wanted women unveiled because they see the veiled woman as an opposite to the idea of a progressive nation. It wasn't women's choices. So what we have here is the history of just appropriating women's bodies to comply with some notions of Islamic fundamentalism, notions of progress and colonialism, but there is no freedom for women's bodies. And that's why women and freedom stand out in that slogan. So I think what's important in this moment is that, I'm seeing some pictures and they are really stand out. So I'm seeing mothers of the martyrs of the 8-year war coming out or sending their widows out. They are wearing veil, they are believers, and still advocating for the lives of women who unveil on the streets. And that's why this moment is beautiful, because after having all of those histories of trauma against veiled women and unveiled women and rural women and women who were deemed as not progressive or women who were deemed to be too much liberated, we're getting to this moment of conversion that we're asking for women to make choices as they want and be respected as equal citizens in the space. So I think this is really important about the understanding of the body of citizens, but particularly bodies of women in the history of the state.
Thank you, Yalda Jan. Fatemeh Jan, do you want to?
No, actually, yeah, I learned a lot from. Thank you so much. I don't have anything to add to those wonderful comments. So let's have some questions from the
the audience. Okay, great. So I'm gonna take liberty, use my privilege and power as a moderator to see which questions I ask. There are so many good questions, and thank you all of you for asking these questions. in this forum. I want to actually start with a question about solidarity that both Elif Sarah and Tahmina Sobat have asked in different ways. So Tahmina's question is, what are some points of relationality and difference between the situation of Afghan women and Iranian women? How is the context of advocacies of women of these two countries similar or different? Is there anything that experiences of Afghan women can teach and help in developing Iranian women's efforts? How do you envision the future of building transnational feminist networks between women of Iran and Afghanistan, keeping in mind that Afghan women are protesting in the streets under the Taliban, dancing under roofs and agitating the with the Iranian women and in solidarity with them? So that's one form of question of relationality and solidarity. And Elif says, what are some concrete call to action items we can initiate in our academic settings? Currently, I'm trying to call my department to do a few things and would love to hear if you have any other suggestions. One, writing, signing solidarity texts and putting them up on department websites. Two, addressing this issue in classes. Three, reaching out to faculty and students from Iran. And four, student admissions usually start this time of the year and run till late September. Internet is cut off in many parts of Iran. So extended deadlines for students from Iran would be a way to support them. What could be other ways in which we can extend solidarity in political terms? I'm gonna just pose that, and then after you guys respond to those, I will read the other set of questions. So any of you who wants to respond to Tahmina and Elif's question? Maybe Fatemeh, since you passed the last question, you should address this first.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I think that that's a wonderful question. Let's start with this point that I myself traveled to Afghanistan several times, and as soon as you are there, you feel that how close we are, not only in terms of culture, but also in terms of women's issues and colonial past, and Islamism, Islamic fundamentalism, and all this. So I think that there are, because of these similarities, we have so much to learn from each other. Like, what happened in Afghanistan last year when Taliban, went back to power was a tragic event for all of us. But at that point, it was also, it was a really disappointing and upsetting moment. But at the same time, I learned the lesson that you cannot count on any external power. And especially because of the military intervention of Afghanistan, of the US on Afghanistan, and that, sort of bubble democracy that was there. And on that, so many Afghan women and men, counted. I think that tragedy happened also because, so many people thought that the US and other, armies of the external powers will preserve that, democracy. But we have seen that, no, this is not going to happen. So I think that was a lesson learned. And I think that, again, here also, in every event, we are, people on the streets, people inside are those, the criteria of everything. And we do not trust, we cannot trust on any sort of interventions from outside or leadership from outside that is, that claiming to be the leader of the movement or to lead everything towards something. But this is mostly the allegation that, some of the governments in this region also make. For instance, the Iranian government, all the time they claim that this is people on the street are deluded by Western powers, or people on the street are charged by someone else from outside and things like that. So this is the lesson learned, actually. And I think that also Afghan women can also learn lesson from Iran, which is that exactly that we have to stop the states to decide on us. And that we have to stop somehow or dismantle this state apparatus that decide on women, and mostly through veiling or unveiling or whatever, that as if we are the battlefields of consolidation of the state, consolidation of religion, consolidation of all those like macro narratives that they have. So I think that this is the lesson that I think that the Afghan women can learn from us, that they have to do something, they have to be strong, and probably they have to sort of standing on their own feet to do something. They cannot be counting on any other power except for themselves. And there are so many other lessons as well. But I think that one of the things that these days were extremely interesting for me, that the way that Afghan women, showed their solidarity. And I think that like through singing, through, street protests, through chanting slogans, and so many of them also participated in different protests that were taking place outside of Iran as well, and probably inside as well. But, that was very interesting because Afghan women and Afghan men, so many Afghan migrants actually in Iran are deprived from elementary rights, from very basic rights that they might have, right of education, right to have, a dignified life, that because of war you had to migrate, but you expect that country such as Iran can provide for you, but they were deprived of that. But still, although those experiences were not good, but they tried to show their solidarity, and that was really moving. And I think that this is another lesson that probably we Iranians should learn from Afghans. When it comes to women, all of us are women. All of us are under a unique and like similar oppression. So I think that was also very interesting. Thank you.
Thank you for the mention. Yalda and Minoo.
Minoo, you go first.
Yeah, I could. Two things. One is, given that I don't live in Iran, and I, as a feminist, as a post-colonial feminist, I believe in not speaking for, right? And I think it's crucial to not speak for Iranian women, but let them speak and hear what they're saying, what they're asking, what they're doing. And that I have been doing, since, the time I left Iran. Also, I think what helps enormously at this particular moment is to leave lots of space for discussion. Of course, I'm an academic. I'm used to going to classes, teaching, reading, discussing, criticizing, writing. And those are crucial for me. And I think it's crucial for our future, for anything that we think about any futurity. And I think during the time of the revolution, we didn't think that much about that, right? So for us was like, let's get rid of dictatorship and everything will be resolved. And this is a moment, and actually we should leave things open for discussions and for debates, for hearing, all the ideas and so on. And in that sense, that is really important for me in terms of politics of solidarity. Also, I think transnationalism actually makes connection between different social movements. However, sometimes we need to be in solidarity with some. Sometimes we need to leave, activists in a specific location to do what they're doing. As for questions of Afghanistan and Iran, this is going to be a long discussion. I don't want to get into this discussion, but the situation of Afghanistan, the Islamic ideology of Taliban is radically different from Islamic nationalism that emerged during the time of the Iranian Revolution and remain as part of the Islamic Republic state discourse with kind of getting constantly being put in crisis since the time of revolution. So in that sense, I think we are really talking about two different contexts. And of course, women have a lot to do from to learn from each other, from to exchange and so on. However, also remember that we are not living in an even egalitarian geopolitical context, and some have more access to representation than others. And it's really important to hear voices that are not necessarily part of the representation, but are being marginalized, suppressed, and so on. And it seems to me representation is a side where we need to actually continue to engage with each other and with other forms of feminism.
Thank you, Minoo. Yalda?
I do like to respond to that question of allyship and solidarity on different levels. Part of what I do is anti-racist mentorship, especially when it comes to graduate students of color and international students. I've been an international student in the US for 10 years, so I think I have an idea of what's going on here. Please, for most of the people who are here, I assume that you're academics, you have some sort of access to Iranian undergraduate and graduate students, Iranian faculty members who are on your campuses. I do want you to please acknowledge that they are traumatized. They probably are sitting with you in the classroom or in the library, but their brain are in those streets. They are getting shot. They are getting triggered by the history of trauma. So many of us have been on those streets in many different occasions. And I myself take a walk, long walks every day. And the mantra is, this is not Tehran. Nobody's shooting at you. This is not a street. Look around. I need to remind my body of what's happening, which is not in the streets of Tehran. I understand that. I know that you know that about me, but the understanding of the body of trigger and trauma is different. Know that probably the span of focus for your students is going to be so short. It's highly likely that they cannot submit assignments on time. Please reach out, acknowledge the trauma, be for them, give them time, because they're going to need time and support to recover. And if they don't, so many of them are going to drop out of the programs that they are in. So please be on their side and listen to them and talk to them about the trauma, because so many of the students are alone. My office hours are just exploding because I have Iranian students from all over the world reaching out to me, and I wish there was a technology. I wish I could ask for their permission and hold their hands. And as a mentor, I'm gonna also suggest this: ask these students if they feel alone to be touched, and if you can hold them, if you can hug them, because so many of them are far away from family and community. Probably they are the only Iranian in your small town, in your college town. So just ask them what they need, but know that they can very much thrive on the support that you provide in this moment. The second level of answer that I want to give to this question is about allyship. Know that there is a transnational patriarchal system of violence going on all over the world. So, we are screaming for the violated bodies of women who got beaten by morality police, but also know that police brutality is a global phenomenon. If you want to fight with us, alongside with us, fight the patriarchy here, fight the police brutality in your town. Lend your voice to Black Lives Matter. Say her name with movements that say the names of queer people of color who got beaten or murdered by racist people and anti-queer communities. Stand with every single step of the way in front of the global right. The rise of global right is a big threat for every one of us in every single space in the world. And if you fight your demon here, you are helping somebody else to fight their demons somewhere else. So do whatever you can do. And for women in Afghanistan, it's a very, very difficult question, and it definitely needs a couple of other Zooms, and I probably am not the person qualified to be on those. I wish I can just join and listen and learn. But one thing that comes into my mind, the same thing about Afghan students on American campuses and in diaspora, know that some of them have become indefinitely displaced. They cannot have access to their families. So reach out to them, be there for them, ask them what you can do. And one thing about women in Afghanistan, don't think that it's Taliban and nothing can be done about that. Don't give up on women in Afghanistan. It just breaks me to tears every single time I see a video from Afghanistan. I received lots of solidarity, lots of love over these days, and I'm grateful to all of that. But two things that really brings me to tears is seeing the dances and chanting and solidarity in the streets of Afghanistan, and seeing my Iraqi sister standing for us. It just shows how much we come ahead of ourselves and the ideology of the nation states and the histories of violence between states, and we can stand for each other. I do believe that we can put pressure on Taliban government together if we don't give up on Afghan women. They should lead us. I have no idea how, but I think they are full of good ideas if we are open to listen and if we are there for them when they need us.
Thank you all. Because there are so many questions and we don't have time, I'm going to ask a couple of questions, and each of you can choose to respond to whichever you want in 2 minutes, if that's okay with you guys as a plan, and then we can end this panel. Thank you. So I'm going to read a few questions, and then each of you just pick one that you really are passionate about responding to. Zainab Peygamberzadeh asks, over the past few days, a few people inside and outside of Iran have been trying to find a way to queer this movement through focusing on slogans such as trans queer freedom and trans life freedom. But unfortunately, as Yalda John mentioned, it seems that the society is not ready to accept slogans such as women life freedom. How do you see the future of this demand for queering this movement? So that's one question. Another question is about I don't know the name of the person who asked the question is not here, but how do we make this immediate to our students and colleagues who imagine the violence elsewhere stays elsewhere? I'm writing to you from Toronto. Today is a Remembrance Day for Truth and Reconciliation here. What I'm learning from my Indigenous colleagues, dispossession of Indigenous women and two-spirited folks' bodies have been and continue to be at the crux of colonial settler state. So in a sense, question about basically the exclusion and dispossession of two-spirit and queer people. And then I think some of these were responded to. There's a question that for Minoo, today in Iran right now, secular fundamentalism is the problem or Islamic fundamentalism? I think Minoo, you talked about this, basically any kind of fundamentalism that is actually reproducing nationalist notions, and both of those, Islamic fundamentalism and secular fundamentalism, are actually in a sense resorting to nationalism. So you don't have to respond to that, but I just wanted to kind of, maybe it's a misunderstanding of hearing what Minoo was saying, which is not that secular fundamentalism is the issue that we are dealing with now. If you have read Minoo's work, she has a whole book on Islamic fundamentalism. So Zubaida asks, how should Muslim women and girls pursue our feminism in places where we have privileges outside of Iran and places with similar policies without having our religion questioned by our own Muslim communities? In my experience, it seems that whether Muslim women talk about forms of oppression we face by Muslim men or toxic communities, we are encouraged to silence ourselves due to stereotypes affecting us and our unwillingness to validate said stereotypes based on Islamophobia compared to genuine concern. How do we navigate activism between these things? And Frances Hasso, hi Frances, asks that I've been confused given the intensity of Western imperialist mobilization around this young woman's death, which is a movie we have all seen before and is particularly relevant given larger geopolitical events, as well as Iran's support for Palestinian resistance, as well as the JCPOA. And the level of psychological oppression and misinformation and lack of grounded knowledge and the ideological filters in the debates, which Minoo mentioned and Sima wrote about. I cannot simply think of this in isolation. And I think the question that Sharar asked about women leading this question and Manmihan Abadi was answered already. But the question that Sharar asks is this basically, that what do you think women are leading this movement / revolution? What do you think about the recent slogan, Manmihan country? So these are the questions to which we we have not responded. So again, if each of you chooses one question and takes 2 minutes to respond, I would appreciate that. Thank you. Anyone?
Do you hear me, Simajan?
Yes, go ahead.
Can I please respond to Zubaydah? Zubaydah, one of the things that I teach is Islamic feminism, and I do not identify as Islamic feminist myself, to just be very clear about that. But I think there is a huge body of work by Muslim women who believe in Islam and identify as Islamic feminists who respond to the question of navigating patriarchy in our communities. And for everybody, the community is different. And for you, it could be the Muslim community. And I think there is no easy way for responding to any of these questions, I'm afraid, without going through the stigma and responding with resistance and being creative in coming up with new epistemological or ontological answers to challenge the dominant discourse that we live in. It's not easy. But I think one of the most effective ways right now, one of the most effective allies that I would like to imagine for women who are dealing with these problems in Iran is for Muslim community to stand for them. Because I do not hear an anti-Islam voice necessarily from inside Iran. Of course, that's a part of voice. There are people who identify as anti-Muslim, but they are a very small section. Most of these girls and women and men that you see on the streets of Iran are Muslims, and they are not fighting with the Muslim world, or they are not fighting with veiling, and they do not wish to unveil anybody by force or by choice. What they are asking for is the freedom of expression for everybody. And I think Muslim communities can do wonders. How? I do not know. I'm sure that in your situation, you definitely know better than me.
Thank you, Yalda, for that to the point response. Thank you. Minoo and Fatemeh?
I would say that patriarchy and patriarchal relations and gendered body as part of citizenship are not unique to religion, non-religion. Everyone who is caring about gender equality, challenging gender discrimination, interrogating how gender even came to exist in these binary terms, need to investigate that. You could come, you know that in many religious traditions, women the feminist theologies or women are challenging, as Yalda mentioned, through the discourse of Islamic feminism, they're trying to challenge all the patriarchal kind of discourse that has been integrated in the name of religion. And also, you know that in the context of liberal secular states, questions of gender are not resolved. Neither gender nor sexuality, they're at the center of social protest and social mobilization. We know with the recent, decisions of the Supreme Court vis-a-vis abortion issues in the US, we are dealing with many of these issues as citizens. So in that sense, what I meant by secular feminism, secular fundamentalism, and is religious fundamentalism, is don't make this space an absolutist space, right? The space of secularism as close to Islamic feminists or as close to feminism that are claiming. Don't close down discussion and don't make it as absolutist as possible. And I have a feeling that unfortunately, each time any of us, any feminist, Iranian feminists who start taking a more complex, nuanced, transnational, relational position, it becomes subjected to that kind of, interrogation, surveillance, accusation, misunderstanding, and so on. And actually, I'm not going to define myself. I've written so many books, articles that are out there and could be read. And unfortunately, people who think like that, I think they haven't read my work, unfortunately, and that is sad. I think that is sad that we have 40 years of feminist literature, feminist revisiting of the Iranian history, feminist activism, and today we are again stuck in this polarity. And I agree with Yalda that it's important to work on the politics of collision through all these differences and similarities, and some of them are open to discussion.
Thank you, Minoo Jan.
Sure.
Fatemeh Jan, last words.
I actually want to very briefly answer to the question by Francis. And the question is about that, the confusion given the intensity of Western imperialist mobilization around this young women's deaths. It's actually sort of disputes the relevance of this, the issue of this death without considering the geopolitical events, especially Iran's support for Palestinian resistance and JCPOA, or Iran's nuclear deal. So I think that I actually am very surprised by this question because, I know and I actually recognize your concerns that that there are so many propaganda around it on Western media and by those people that we mentioned already that, try to confiscate this movement and claim to be leader of this movement and so on and so forth. And so many of them are like monarchists and, the team of Trump and so many of them. But I think that I'm actually trying to look at the whole thing from the Iranian people point of view. And I think that here, the point of view is really matters. It matters because when you are from outside, looking from outside, and also being concerned about the Palestinian cause and then, the nuclear deal and sanctions, the whole thing might appear differently to you when you actually are inside and on the streets of Tehran and see what people are chanting and what are the wishes and ideas and thoughts of these people. So just let me give you one example of the sanctions because this is really important. I myself am totally against the sanctions, and you know, and I also enjoyed reading Seema's book, and we had a session on that, and that was a very great session on the sanctions and this rightful, you know, politics of rightful killing, which was very interesting idea in that book. But you see what is happening. You know, this is what I observed myself. You know, after the Green Movement, especially, and in 2019, and also recently, that while the Iranian government, you know, claims that we are under the sanction and we cannot, you know, provide enough, like enough food or enough medications, enough everything for the people, but at the same time they are trying to update the instruments of oppression of the people, you know, exactly during the sanctions. And this is really amazing. And if you look at the pictures and the, you know, the facilities that, you know, the vans and machines and all those shockers and all those, you know, the police materials, basically, the instrument, you see that one thing that has been all the time, despite the sanctions, has been updated is the instruments of oppression. So I think that if you are talking about sanctions, we have to consider that these are Iranian people who are sacrificed, but not only by the Americans, but also by the Iranian government. So that's what I'm talking about. So I think that this is not either or. This is not, you know, this duality is sometimes very deluding. This is something that we have to go deep and see what is going on. And I actually want to, you know, take advantage and go back to this, the morality police that all the time is repeated, which is completely annoying because this is policing. This is not morality. There is no morality issue in it. So I'm totally against that item and word, because morality is this is a policing like a police that you see everywhere on the streets of France, in the US, in London, in Montreal, in so many places. This is police that patrolling and you know, arrest women because of their hijab. This is not something that, you know, this is not a state propaganda that you see on the Western media. This is something that we have experienced personally. And I think that if we are talking about sanctions, if we are talking about, we have to also consider this, and you know, like opposed to both sides of this. There is no just one side of this. And I think that in this aspect, they are somehow together, although they might seem the opposite side. Thank you.
Thank you, Fatemeh Jan. I completely agree. As you said, I have written my book on that topic and was very much involved with the and still am, no sanctions on Iran campaign. And something that we have been saying, and this is not just theory, it's actually happening on the ground, is that the US sanctions are actually helping the repressive and security apparatus of the Iranian state to basically suffocate any kind of dissent in the name of national security, because when there are sanctions, then any kind of protest is violently and brutally suppressed in the name of foreign collusion. And the people who are on the streets of Iran, at least majority of them, are not those who are brainwashed by the West or the US. They have legitimate concerns, many grievances, and many of which have to do actually with the atrocities, the economic pressures that the sanctions have caused. And there are sanctions profiteers. We saw that in Iraq. Feminist scholars in Iraq have written about how sanctions profiteering actually hurt women. And we see that in Iran today too. So when talking about sanctions, exactly what our speakers have been saying, there isn't this either or, that one can talk about how these seemingly oppositional forces are working together and taking away whether it's social freedoms or economic justice from many people, in particular the most vulnerable segments of the Iranian population, including women, including Afghan refugees, including queer and trans people who are already excluded from the realms of political and cultural citizenship. So just wanted to say that, and I'm hoping that this panel and the brilliant contributions of our three speakers can move us beyond this either or position and this impossibility of any kind of discussion that either labels one as being West toxified or one as being, paid by the Islamic regime, and having these spaces to actually have conversations, which many people in Iran have started and have been doing for years. And unfortunately, exactly because of the internet situation, we could not have speakers from within Iran because the internet is disconnected. But there are brilliant activists, scholars, and artists, feminist scholars and activists and artists in Iran who are doing this work and who are basically putting their lives on the line. And the least we could do is to enable conversations. Thank you again, and thank you everyone for staying with us and being here today. And thank you, Nithya and Amina, for doing such a wonderful job behind the scenes.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Thank
Have a
you.
good rest of the day.
All right. Thank you.